Born in 1903 in Indian Territory to industrious pioneers, Thomas Welborn Hope never had much use for hard work, at least of a physical nature. Welborn courted his muse, tramped all over the world, and along the way became a poet of national significance. Welborn's parents, Tom and Minnie, helped build Ada. Tom was the town's first banker. Minnie, who held a master's degree before the dawn of the 20th century, was Ada's first person of high education and culture. The dirt streets and sturdy characters of this brand new community provided nourishment for Welborn's fertile imagination. Listening keenly to his mother's lively and intellectual conversations, Welborn developed an early affinity for wordplay. The Ada Evening News published his first poem in 1910 when he was only 7 years old. After graduating from East Central at the age of 18, the Ada College was only 12 years old at the time, he openly flirted with poetry, following the encouragement of a beloved professor. He knew he had a knack for it, but in those days men were graded on more practical terms.
Though she was weak and vain, as I am vain and weak, she had many virtues of which I shall not speak, but one I will iterate again and again. A treasure never dimmed by her distance, a gift which she endowed on me, her persistence. In drink and song, in evil and good, I do it, as indeed she would, persistently.
In 1924, a chance meeting stirred Welborn's soul and ultimately sealed his fate. That year, while in Norman, Oklahoma, he met Vachel Lindsay, a tramp poet who described to Welborn what sounded like a reason to live. Welborn heard of the adventure, romance, and danger of the open road and the beauty of capturing it all in verse. The seed had been planted, but obligation still beckoned. In a doomed effort to join Ada's social and economic circles, Welborn took a job in his parents' drugstore in 1930, even obtaining a pharmacist's license to make it official. Then came the dual specters of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, surefire signals that tramping was the best life for him. Welborn started tramping during those hard times. These short trips through the southwest United States made his writing better. From 1932 to 1937, the national magazines Poetry and the New Republic published several of his poems. This early attention among his literary peers fueled his desire to escape. In 1940, Welborn let it all go: the materialism, the expectations, the routines and trappings of an ordinary life. Plus, he was far too eccentric for most people in Ada. So he walked away from the drugstore for good and started his life anew as a full-time poet. Over the next 30 years, Welborn would tramp around the world, trading his poems for food, shelter, or transportation. He would work whenever he needed to, as a farmhand, a fisherman, or a newspaper reporter. He would sleep wherever he could, under bridges, on sandbars, or even in open fields. Welborn moved constantly, although he spent a short spell of time in New York City, falling in love with its man-made grandeur.
From the top floor of a publishing house, in at an artist's window I can peer. I watch him paint, I see his merry spouse bring him inspiration, cheese, and beer. Down in Greenwich Village, down below me there, they have the sovereign happiness I lack. As to the shelves a load of books I bear, the souls of men grow heavy on my back. I can pause to gaze again and turn and enviously long to live and toil and thrive, like the authors whose late lamplights burn to break my back. Oh, I'd create and wive. The express jammed gets underway. The elbow jabbing ends at last. There is a momentary stay to the station next from station past. Of human fury face to face, pushing, hauling, squeezing, clinging, subsiding slowly in its place. Then plaintively is heard his singing. The blind singer of the subways. He electrifies the furious car. The herd of vexed humanity hears him as from another star. The temporary angers fade, the grandeur of his presence gains. His music soothes those tempers frayed and heals Manhattan's aches and pains. So royally metropolitan he seems, not pitiful though alone. All find a friend in that brave man whose voice to all New York is known. Imperial, his presence glows, his fine pale face is lifted up, a grateful stream of silver flows as he sinks past into his cup. For such a personality never before lit up our underground, none there but would ride on forever in the spell of its marvelous sound. But there's the next stop, axles groan as brakes apply with iron pain. And with the singing angel gone, the blind crowd's fury bursts again.
But for the most part, it was always the open road, headed to the next town, and the one after that, and the one after that, always leaving a favorable impression on those he met. When he was ready to move on, he'd thumb a ride or hop the nearest boxcar. During his 3 decades as a full-time tramp, Wellborn wrote more than 2,000 poems, easily more than one new poem per week. His poetry found its way into the pages of several prestigious national publications, most notably the immensely popular American literary magazine Saturday Review. In the later years of Wellborn's life, he slowed his tramping down a bit and began wintering on a regular basis in Tulsa and Ada. He'd take whatever job he could find to get by, from newspaper reporting to hotel night clerk. He lived hand to mouth, but he wouldn't have had it any other way. In 1970, with the help of friend and fellow Ada native Guy Logsdon, the University of Oklahoma Press published a collection of Wellborn's poetry titled The Great River and Small and Other Poems. It would be the first book of original poetry the university would ever publish. 4 years later, Wellborn turned to prose and developed 2 short stories he first wrote in 1951 for the Daily Oklahoman into a full-length book about the infamous 1909 Ada lynchings. He titled it 4 Men Hanging, The End of the Old West. It's now out of print and commands a high price on the used book market.
After New York, he stood once more in the long wideness of the street that knew him well those years before, but as strange now as his old defeat. This was the West where he was born, in a day when the old undimmed blazed its sunset last in scorn on the new, arriving tame and trimmed. Here Geronimo and captors came, the old chief unbroken but unfanged. Here once in sunset's failing flame, the horse barn where 4 men were hanged. And gone the red brick bank grown gray, the new ones marble in its stead, nor those his friends of that far day, though some had faces of the dead. So he walked on with his father's face, perhaps, or most his fearful mother's, and stopped before a fallen place and her hydrangeas, now another's. No anxious voice to welcome him, too far to many city bars, since he first tried, when faith was dim, to walk on stilts toward the stars.
Wellborn eventually gave up his tramp status and settled in Oklahoma City to enjoy the sunset of his days. He died in 1988 at the age of 85. He was laid to rest in Ada's Rosedale Cemetery next to his parents. Misunderstood by many to the very end, even the birth year carved on his tombstone is wrong. Perhaps Logsdon provided the best eulogy in the introduction to The Great River and Small, written some 18 years before the tramp poet's death. When spring comes, Wellborn will again be on the road, a road he will follow as long as his health permits. His possessions will go with him, for all that he owns will fit into a small traveling bag. Wherever he goes, he will leave behind a poem or a story, for he is a natural-born raconteur.